My name is Matt Lindstrom, and I teach in the Political Science Department, direct the Eugene J. McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. Very happy to welcome you all here tonight. Tonight's event is a partnership collaboration between the Global Awareness Lecture Series, which has been going on since 1982. So it's a long-standing series that brings in international perspectives. And tonight we're very fortunate to have with us Khalil Nakhleh, who is from Ramallah. Ramallah to Collegeville. It's a connection that doesn't happen very often these days, so we're very pleased to have our distinguished guest with us tonight. With that, I want to introduce Professor Richard Alvarez from the Department of Sociology, who will introduce our guest.
Good evening. It's a great privilege to be able to introduce this man from Galilee, who is one of the most cosmopolitan human beings I know. He truly is from Galilee. If you take a look at his vita, he graduated from high school, had the name of St. Joseph's Seminary, in a town you've all heard of, Nazareth, in Israel. He took his bachelor's degree from another place that you know of, St. John's University, then went off to Indiana University, completed his PhD studies in sociocultural anthropology there, came back to St. John's, taught for a while, and I met Khalil when I arrived here in '75. He was one of the folks who helped get me oriented to this place. After my time down in Chicago, my culture shock was probably almost as great as Khalil's had been. And a few years after that, Khalil began a most extraordinary career that took him from Collegeville to Boston, from Boston to Geneva, from Geneva back to Palestine. He has been involved in non-governmental organizations, consultancies for the UN, consultancies for non-governmental organizations whose names I cannot begin to pronounce, and in his spare time has published quite a number of books that, alas, I have not read. I think my summer has its agenda set before it. So instead of the traditional summary of that work, which I cannot give, I want to tell you a story. Way back in the day when Khalil and I were here together, President Michael Blecker decided to renovate the quad so that it looks the way it does now. Our offices at the time were on the 3rd floor, and we had to be moved. So Khalil and I shared a divided seminar room in what's now the Peter Engel Science Building, a couple of closet-sized spaces, and we got to know each other pretty well over the course of the year. And at one point, now things get sort of mythic, I think I must have had echoes of a movie that I'm sure none of you have seen that had a once famous soundtrack that I'm sure none of you have heard. The movie, based on a novel by a man named Leon Uris, is called Exodus. It's a kind of founding of Israel version of the 10 Commandments. Very heroic, very glorious. Folks like me who grew up in the 60s grew up with that as a soundtrack to our high school lives. And I must have said something that had echoes of that jingoistic sentiment. Khalil gave me a sort of mini lecture. And I can remember that at the end of it, I looked at him and said, "Colleague, you are a very powerful proponent of your cause." Indeed he is, and I am proud to present to you Dr. Khalil Nakhleh.
Thanks, Richard, very much. So that time. I'm very glad to be here, to return here. I looked forward to it. I've been trying to condense this material, my lecture, for a number of months. I changed it so many times. And so what I will present tonight before that. What Richard said is actually true, a true description. I don't mince words. I will say, if it is my position, I will say what I believe. If it is not my position, I'll try to present the information as I see it making sense. Not to appease anybody, but in a committed, passionate advocate of a position, which is basically a position of how to make sure that we help Palestinians achieve their genuine human rights. That's the position. Not as an outsider. I'm a Palestinian, involved, very involved. I'm not a politician. I'm not member of any faction. I'm just generally an involved Palestinian, talking to you from experiential living and from inside. So then I tried to focus, I decided I will focus the lecture tonight on basically three parts, 3 issues. And I think I'll try to do it in 40 minutes. I limit myself max to 40 minutes so we can have time for discussion and questions and so forth. I start with a quote from Arundhati Roy. You know Arundhati Roy, who wrote The God of Small Things, and she's a powerful lady. She says, the trouble is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you've seen it, keeping quiet, saying nothing, becomes as political an act as speaking out. There is no innocence. Either way, you're accountable. There's no innocence. Either way, all of us are accountable once we know the facts. Once you know the facts, there's no excuse to say, well, I didn't know, and therefore I cannot take a position. This is just as a means of introduction. So the first part, I will try to address some basic issues about the root of the ongoing conflict. All of you are aware, I assume and I expect, that there is an ongoing conflict between Palestine and Israel, and this ongoing conflict, in order for it to be solved over the last century, but in order for us to think critically and reasonably about a possible solution, I believe that we need to know what the roots are of this conflict. So, starting with Palestine, the area that was called Palestine, historical Palestine, which means it's surrounded in the west by the Mediterranean Sea, in the east by the River Jordan, south by Egypt, north by Lebanon. This is the area that we're talking about. This was through the Zionist movement, which started by Herzl, Theodor Herzl, over a century ago. The Zionist movement decided that a place for the Jews in the world, all over, and especially, even though it started much before Hitler, much before Nazi atrocities and so forth, but it started that there is a need to have a place for the Jews in the world, and political, then the whole movement of political Zionism emerged. In Herzl was the leader of that movement, and a decision was made to transform the land of Palestine, what they call the land of Israel, into a homeland for the Jews. The actual creation of Israel happened in terms of legally, happened through the resolution, through the recommendation of the General Assembly of the UN, through the recommendation of the General Assembly of the UN to divide that land into two parts, one part as a Jewish state, one part as an Arab state. The point I want to make here is that recommendation in 1947, 29th of November 1947, that recommendation was actually illegal. In other words, that recommendation, for it to have been legal, had to go to the Security Council and had to be approved by the Security Council to transform it into a resolution. Not many people think about this. In effect, what was created was a hoax. What was created was, through illegal means, was an entity that became called Israel. One. Two, what was created if you look at now it's called in the UN annals as the Resolution 181. If you look at Resolution 181 of the General Assembly, it says that for it to be valid, no party has the right to change it by any means, to change what was resolved about it by any means, meaning having one state for one Jewish state, one Arab state. But actually what happened then, as soon as the UN General Assembly voted on that, as soon as they voted on that, in 47, the Israeli militias, armed militias, invaded and occupied the entire area of the map that was designated to be the Arab states, the Arab state of Palestine. So consequently, it changed the whole nature of that so-called Resolution 181. The reason I don't want to dwell on it much here, because otherwise it will take us the whole night, but the reason I'm starting with this is to know where the roots of the conflict are. The roots of the conflict did not start in 67 or did not start now. This was done, of course, without the consent of the majority, which is the majority of the indigenous Palestinian people living living in Palestine at the time. As you see, the allocation for two states, and you don't need to take notes because I can leave these slides for you. But the allocation of the land for these two states was 55% for the land to be a Jewish state, and Palestine 45% to be an Arab state at a time when no more than 7% was controlled by the Jewish minority that existed in Palestine. The resolution divided Palestine, if you look at the map, into these sections as two states. The red is the Jewish state, to be the Jewish state. The green is to be the Arab state. immediately following the partition recommendation about, as a result of the attack of Jewish militias, armed Jewish militias that were supported by many Western countries, about 450 Palestinian villages and towns were ethnically cleansed, either destroyed or the population were killed or expelled, which became the heart of the refugee problem, what we call the refugee problem. About 850,000 of those survived were driven out and became displaced refugees. Consequently, as a result of this, Israel declared itself as a state on 78% of the area of Palestine, and as soon as it declared itself on 15th of May 1948, the first country that recognized this was the US. Truman, president then. The displacement of the Palestinian people has been an ongoing process. From the time of the British Mandate, which means the period between 1922, 1947, from the time of the British Mandate until today. Because since the beginning of the British Mandate, the British use what they call emergency regulation law. Emergency regulation of 1945 was that they used in India before and they used in other occupied places, was to be able to expel people from their homes, detonate houses of all suspected terrorists, all suspected people who are against the system, and banish them from their place of residence to another place, even in the same country, and on. During this process, the British Mandate resulted in the displacement of between 100 to 150,000 Palestinians. I'm talking about the Palestinians who were living in Palestine. And you go down the line to show that the process itself was continuous. This is just to make it easier for different periods. So at the end, if you look today, at the end of 2008, at least 7.1 million Palestinians, that represent 67% of the entire Palestinian population, which is estimated today at 10.6 million worldwide, were displaced persons. Among these displaced persons, among the 7.1, 6.6 million refugees. Today, 6.6 million Palestinian refugees, and 427,000 IDPs. IDPs are referred to internally displaced persons, meaning people who were forced out of their villages because their villages were destroyed and forced into another place. So currently, the IDPs are still living in the place, but not in the place of residence. Their villages were destroyed. Either the village was near the border, or the village was had a strategic impact, or whatever. This makes Palestinian refugees today and internally displaced persons the largest and longest standing case of displaced persons in the world, which is important to keep in mind. So this is just a summary. We're talking about 6.6 million refugees, 7.1 million displaced Palestinians that represent 67% of the population. This is just an illustration, a graphic illustration by type of displacement. and this is just summary of the numbers of Palestinian refugees and IDPs, internally displaced persons, by group. As you see, inside, you see the column before last, inside Israel today, there are nearly 335,000 Palestinians inside Israel, like myself, but who were displaced, who are IDPs, who have been displaced from their native villages. Native villages were destroyed and they are living somewhere else. Another graphic illustration. Now, this is the first part, to set the parameters, to set the limit. The second part I want to deal with, which is really the longest and more condensed, is the part that deals with the current situation. In other words, what is the current situation? Now, I don't know what reading you have done. I hope you have done some reading, some basic readings, at least to follow up with me. Today, the term, the occupied Palestinian territory that we use, that the UN uses, US, World Bank uses, refers basically to the west bank of the Jordan River, because you see Palestine, Jordan is to its east, Mediterranean to the west. The west bank of the Jordan River that has been occupied in 1967, which includes East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. These are the areas that are referred to as occupied Palestinian territory. So anytime you read occupied Palestinian territory, some people use it in the plural territories, but the official UN term is territory because it's one territory. It refers to these areas, which these areas represent only 22% of the total historical Palestine. As I said earlier, the 78% were occupied in 48, and on that area, Israel was declared as a state. This area, the occupied Palestinian territory, West Bank, Gaza, including Jerusalem, it includes today, as of the last statistics, 3.9 million Palestinians and nearly 513,000 Zionist colonists. They call them settlers. I prefer to call them colonists because they are not settlers like you go and settle in a village. You go colonize a place, you steal the land, and you build a settlement on it, and you prevent the indigenous people and the owners of the land from living on it. So now, today, currently, there are in the West Bank and Gaza 3.9 million Palestinians. In the West Bank, there are 513,000 Zionist colonists. And if you look at the population today, again, to give you an idea, if you look at the population, the 3.9 million Palestinians, 1.5 million live in Gaza, 2.4 million live in the West Bank, including Jerusalem. And keep in mind that this is a very young population, so about 64% of the population is below 18 years of age, and nearly between 75 and 80% below 40 years old, which means if you consider that the current occupation started 43 years ago, which means that nearly, as I said here, 4/5 of the population were born under occupation. They know nothing else other than occupation, no other reference. currently, this is the current map of the West Bank. The dent in here is the Jerusalem area. In this, in 2009, 498,000, nearly 500,000 Palestinians in 92 communities live in segregated areas. All of them, nearly 500,000, face the risk of forced displacement, meaning they risk being moved from the area in which they live. Over the last 62 years, meaning since Palestine originally was occupied and Israel was established, there has been a continuous process of colonization and apartheid and occupation. Not only occupation, not only military occupation, but there has been a system, a continuous system of apartheid and colonization. Israel has systematically, and these words are chosen carefully, has systematically confiscated, appropriated, annexed, and assimilated virtually all land belonging to the Palestinians, leaving them approximately between 10 to 14% of their original land. So any discussion, that means any discussion today about a Palestinian entity of whatever sort, a Palestinian independent entity is not more to be built, established, or not more than 10% of the total land area. Now this is just graphically to show you how Palestine before the partition in 46, and then moving on to the current situation. The green, so the talk today about this, the last map, this dispersed green dots, this is the area that they are thinking of, or they are negotiating about having a state. In the latest Herzliya conference in Herzliya, which is a conference about Israel's security and strength, Ehud Barak, who was the prime minister and who is now the Minister of Defense or the Minister of War, I don't call it defense, he made a statement that attracted some attention. He said, in other words, recognizing the reality, he said, if and as long as between the Jordan and the sea, historical Palestine, there's only one political entity named Israel, it will end up being either non-Jewish, because non-Jewish meaning the majority will be non-Jews, or non-democratic. If the Palestinians vote in elections, it is a binational state. Binational in his sense, meaning that there are Jews and there are Palestinians and there are Jews, but the Palestinians are controlled by the Jews. So it's an apartheid binational state. And if they don't, it is an apartheid state, meaning we can continue controlling the area, and but it will continue as an occupied area. Somebody else just recently, a professor of history who used to be the deputy mayor of Jerusalem for a long time, his name is Miron Ben Venesti, wrote a very very insightful, I think, and critical article about the situation published recently. Anyway, he described the existing situation. These are quotes from him. He described the existing situation today as a de facto apartheid binational regime. Not a state, it's binational regime. And he defines, he refers to the term, he said this descriptive term refers to the prevailing status quo where there is a total dominance of the Jewish Israeli nation which controls a Palestinian nation that is fragmented both territorially and socially. At a time when there is a huge gap in GDP between Palestinians under occupation and the occupying Israelis of a magnitude of nearly 1 to 20. Such a gap cannot endure without the force of arms which enforce the control system. So in other words, we're not talking about a natural, we're talking about a very abnormal situation where people on the one hand are struggling trying to struggle to get their freedom and to live free. All the economic, he continues, all the economic, social, and spatial systems of governance are designed to maintain and safeguard Israeli privileges and prosperity on both sides of the Green Line. The Green Line is really the armistice line of the 1948, at the expense of millions of captive, impoverished Palestinians. Now, keeping this in mind, in 1993, they actually before 93, it culminated in 93, but 91, 92, they started a process, a covert, undercover, secret process of negotiations started in Oslo, Norway, between Palestinians, some Palestinians, and some Israelis, Israeli academics, and some Palestinian leaders from the Fatah faction. They started that process at a time when overt, all visible negotiations were taking place in Washington, in Washington, D.C. Both of these processes were supported by the U.S. and were supported by Israel in order to find some kind of an arrangement, some kind of a livable arrangement. The process that became known as the Oslo process, in reference to the Oslo, because that's where the negotiations were taking place, culminated in what became known as the Declaration of Principles, or the DOP, signed by initials. The DOP, in 13 September 1993, was signed on the lawn of the White House to show the White House support and international, not just the American support, but American and international support for this. That led to the creation, in 93, led to the creation of the establishment of a Palestinian Authority. Was supposed to have been an autonomous, independent Palestinian Authority. But the Oslo process also agreed, what they agreed in it, in this DOP that they signed, that the land, this initial 22% of the area of Palestine, will be divided into 3 categories of areas, into 3 categories. Now, category A, that is referred to as Area A, of the West Bank, which represents roughly about 18% of the total, will have full PA control, PA jurisdiction. PA meaning Palestinian Authority, for brief. And Area B represents roughly about 22%, will have PA civil control, Palestinian Authority civil control, and joint PA and Israel security control. When you see joint PA Israel security control, which means Israel security control with the acquiescence of the PA. And the third area, Area C, that represents nearly 60% of the West Bank, exclusive Israeli control, which that whole area includes the Jordan Valley, which is the rich agricultural production area, most of farmland, and most of water resources. But since 2002, this whole area was reoccupied. Formally, we were living in Ramallah then, was formally reoccupied. Tanks rolled in, reoccupied this area, A, B, C, all of them. And so the discussion about the division of these areas is just at best theoretical, because now is all under full Israeli control. Now, in the Oslo process, with the PA, what was created, basically a new political class, and it's more important, in addition to that, what was created and it continues to be created is a new policing class. New policing class, basically of tens of thousands trained, equipped primarily by the US, the EU, and Canada. Primarily, these three, in fact, the EU, the European Union and its member states, and specifically of its member states is in the UK, Britain. They are constantly training brigades of, or battalions, I don't know that, I'm not a military person, but each unit, about 500 trained, fully equipped persons in order to maintain Palestinian security. They are being trained not to confront occupation, not to maintain, not to control and protect Palestinian freedom, but they are being maintained as a security force, basically, which end up transforming the whole area into the beginning of a police regime, a police entity, where you can't have expression of freedom, a freedom of expression. You can't demonstrate. You can't demonstrate in Ramallah. You can't criticize the PA, and on and on. So this is one of the obvious, one would notice, one of the obvious results of the Oslo process. And of course, with it, there is a big bureaucratic class. With it, there is a big NGO class. All the NGOs, because it's a booming business. And ask me, I know about this. All of the NGOs, it's becoming an industry. NGOs, whether they are dealing with human rights or whether they are dealing with agriculture, whether they are dealing with education and so forth. And then there's a big business class that is seeing an opportunity, Palestinian and non-Palestinian, but seeing an opportunity to benefit from this new Oslo opening, as it were, just for to eliminate and to go forward because of time. Now, a French group, I think, I thought that I put this just for you to contemplate. A French group tried to present the current map of pieces in the West Bank in the form of isolated islands, as using just the marine images and so forth. But it shows you graphically that all of these pieces are not really connected, and there is no way that you can, even if there is a political decision tomorrow to establish a state, an independent, viable state, there is no way you can do this. Now, I'm talking about the West Bank, but there is the other part of this area of the 22%, which is Gaza. The Gaza Strip, which is a piece at the bottom of the whole area of Palestine, and bordering Egypt on the south, and then the Mediterranean on the west, is a strip, very narrow strip, which has the 1.5 million Palestinians. The Gaza Strip, when people are allowed, or commerce is allowed, and now it is not allowed to enter, Gaza Strip has been restricted to 6 entry points, all of which are controlled by Israel. All of these entry points are controlled by Israel. The last one, which you heard probably in the news, Rafah, is for pedestrian traffic, is controlled to some degree by Egypt, by Israel. And the rest, each of the crossing points are designated for certain, this is for industrial fuel, or for grain, or for humanitarian goods, and so forth. The Gaza Strip, with all these 6 or 7 crossing points, has been subjected, and currently continues, to illegal siege since 1991. And this siege was reinforced since 14 June 2007, when Hamas won the election and declared itself as a government in Gaza, to punish, collective punishment, to punish the people from Gaza for electing Hamas, because they declared after the elections that this is the most transparent and the most observed election. Carter and others declared, and then it was so. But as long as once they saw the results, and it started being legitimate election, and so you start raising questions about really the value of elections as an expression of making decisions. But since it's an ongoing process since 91, but definitely since 14 June 2007, the siege has been tightened and increased. And I don't want to go through it, but you see what materials are allowed and not allowed. Just basic statistics that in the Gaza Strip, the poverty levels is around 80%, unemployment is nearly 42%, and the average monthly household income is $400, $423, where the actual household expenditure is $469, just to give you references. And this without elaborating, but it shows how the illegal siege of Gaza affects the life of people, whereby, for example, the number of trucks truckloads of goods that entered represented only 23% of the need of the people for that area. Likewise, for industrial fuel, meaning the fuel that you need to operate, to power the electric company that provides power in Gaza. Now, also keep in mind that access to water is a basic human right for people to have access to water. Currently, Palestinians in the OPT is the occupied Palestinian territory. Currently, Palestinians in the OPT do not have access to adequate or safe water supplies. Nearly between 180,000 to 200,000 in rural areas are not connected to, have no access to running water. In terms of consumption and so forth, Palestinian water consumption barely reaches 70 liters per day per person, whereby the World Health Organization standard at least a minimum of 100 liters per day. And I said, as I mentioned earlier, in the meantime, there are about 513,000 Zionist colonist settlers in the West Bank living in more than 144 settlements. This number constitutes about 1/5 of the Palestinian population of the West Bank. But in the meantime, at the same time, they control more than 80% of available water resources. I'll go forward. When did we agree that I should end? Now, the nature of the state that we're talking about, the nature of Israel as a state. Now, we're talking about a unit, an entity, a state that is in defiance of international law, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Convention that apply to occupying powers, where it defied so far more than 160 UN General Assembly resolutions and at least 39 UN Security Council resolutions. It's the only state in the area that possesses weapons of mass destruction, meaning nuclear weapons, hundreds of nuclear weapons, last estimate were something like 300 heads, and stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons. And it refuses, as a state, to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. You may ask a question, why doesn't the US impose pressure on that, since making all the fuss about Iran that has no nuclear weapons? In a recent article by John Dugard, Professor John Dugard, he's professor in South Africa. He was the rapporteur for human rights for Palestine in the UN. In a recent article, 2009, he said, how does one describe a state that practices colonialism and apartheid and is guilty of serious war crimes against humanity? Surely, it must be seen as a criminal state. Because he was, in the last mission, he was not allowed to enter Israel. Now, this kind of state, you say, who sustains it? How does it survive? Under a long-term 10-year agreement, the US gives, not lends, gives, grants Israel $3 billion of military aid every year in cash at the beginning of each fiscal year plus additional increments of economic aid and loan guarantees on a year-by-year basis. Aid of this magnitude obviously greatly helps the Israeli economy. It also gives Israel virtually total impunity to commit whatever atrocities it wants against the Palestinians without fear that the US will cut it off. In a recent article by I probably will just pass this because of time. Okay. The third part I want to focus on is what is my view for the future. The main question to answer is how to ensure genuine rights for the people of Palestine. In my view, first, we have to adjust our language of discourse. We have to change the concepts, the way we talk about it, and the way we think about it, about the conflict. That's why I went through all of that in terms of the roots of the conflict. In my view, the discourse, the language, should start by purging itself from the language that you hear in the media, in the current media, mainstream media, and diplomatic language of two-state solution, because as we see, it's not possible at all, even if there is a political decision to create it. It's not possible. Structurally, in terms of land, it's not possible. We have to purge the language itself from two-state solution, 2 states for 2 people, West Bank and Gaza, East Jerusalem, peacemaking, direct or indirect negotiations, state building, legal or illegal settlement, etc. Because this language reflects another concept. The language that should replace that, in my view, should focus on our right as a Palestinian people, as an occupied people, to use all means of resistance to achieve our liberation. To use all means of resistance, we select what is the appropriate means, at what time, and for how effective it is. Towards living in a free, non-racist, secular country in the entire land of historical Palestine. In other words, not the divisions, the existing divisions today. Towards emancipation from occupation and economic dependency, which we are under now. Towards achieving individual and collective rights for all citizens of future Palestine, regardless of their religion, Jews, Muslims, Christians, etc. I'm not just talking for, I'm talking for a future Palestinian country in which the original, the population of Palestine live equally. Where we enforce, where we struggle for the enforcement of international law, not selectively. Where the kind of leadership is elected is accountable and responsive to the needs. Not leadership that is imposed on us from outside. Not quislings to advocate towards self-reliance and productivity. using our land for productive agriculture, towards the right of all the refugees and displaced persons that I mentioned earlier, who were ethnically cleansed from their homes and country by the Zionist colonial movement in 1947-48 to return to Palestine. We should be committed, in my view, we should be committed to struggle together with all anti-Zionist people, regardless of who they are or where they are. Like, it's happening. There's some of these things are happening now. Advocacy groups in different places. Critical discourse is taking place among some groups of American Jewry, in Europe, in Australia, in Canada. We should be committed to struggle together with all anti-Zionist people for, one, the dismantlement of the existing system of colonial apartheid. I'm talking about the system, not the people. You dismantle the system. Apartheid created systems that distinguish between people, separate people, legal systems, economic systems, spatial arrangements, etc. We should struggle towards the dismantlement of the existing system of colonial apartheid and all forms of racist, political, spatial, economic, and psychological separation on the historical land of Palestine. We should work together to achieve the unhindered return of all Palestinian individuals and groups to historical Palestine and to exercise their inalienable natural right to acquire these properties back. This is what Resolution 194 stipulates, UN Resolution 194, that Palestinian refugees have the right to go back, or if they don't want to go back, have the right to receive compensation. But they have the right to go back to the lands and to the homes from which they were expelled. And three, that we should struggle for the total freedom of all the people of historical Palestine, the total freedom to choose the type of their governance system without any coercion or prejudice, and to safeguard the principle of separating religious beliefs from the political system and the use of religion as the basis of government. And to end my view of the future, that we should insist on having the legal guarantee of equal rights of individuals and groups for all minorities living in the new Palestinian society, regardless of their religious or ethnic affiliation. Thank you very much. Am I taking the questions? Yeah. Okay, please. Shall we start here? Okay, go ahead.
How would your view for the future change, do you think, if you were a policymaker? I understand, I agree with your assessment of what should happen and what is just in many of our minds, but what do you think if you're looking from a policy standpoint of what is a political reality? And I know some people think that's a bad term to use, but I think it's effective too if you're looking towards results too.
All what has been done so far has been done from a policy point of view. and did not get anywhere, did not lead us to anywhere. Because from a policy point of view, you look for interests. You look for maximizing interest, maximizing your own interest as whoever the policymaker is, and you really don't look necessarily, and most often, for realizing the rights of the people you're advocating for. That's my problem with policy. That's why I cannot be a politician. I cannot work as a policy person. I may be willing to advise policymakers if they are willing to listen, or if they are willing to read, or if they can show that they comprehend what they read, even if they read. So I don't think policymakers, the track record of policymakers has not been promising at all, has not been successful. I think the record, the people who are suffering from this have to take the initiative.
Just a question. At the beginning of your presentation, you established or you argued that the establishment of Israel was illegal because it was done by a General Assembly resolution.
Sorry.
Rather than a substantive resolution of the UN Security Council. But then later in the presentation, you cite statistics of Israel's disobedience of some 160.
Not abiding by, yes.
Resolutions. Now, my understanding is some of those are General Assembly resolutions as well.
General Assembly and Security Council, yes.
So how do you say that one state, one's legally binding, they're legally binding in one case, and they're not legally binding in another case?
No, I didn't say that. You probably misunderstood. I didn't say one is legally binding in one place. I didn't say one is legally binding in one place and not binding in another. I'm saying that specific General Assembly resolution is not binding. That specific 181. And
194 is then?
now, yes, but 194, that is the 181, which led to, which resulted from which the establishment of Israel resulted on that basis, is even today talking about it as binding or not binding. Somebody would say, well, this is moot question anyway because Israel exists. Fine, but I'm saying that we should look at it. We should look at how it was manipulated and created. Now, what I'm saying is that then 194 as a resolution, which allows for refugees, Palestinian refugees, to return, which has been endorsed by a sequence of other resolutions following it. I did not go through them here. Reinforcing 194, this has been ignored, not only by Israel, has been ignored by the U.S. and this ought to be binding, has not been implemented. Yes.
I have a few notes. First, how do you decide who owns the land, the original land of Palestine and Israel? Because both Jews and Palestinians were there thousands of years ago, and both claim that this land is theirs. And they've been fighting against each other, like even if you read the Old Testament.
No, not both claims. The Jews claim that God gave them this land. If you believe in divine intervention of handing out land, that's your problem. I don't believe in it. Okay? That's now, the fact is, I mentioned that before 47, before there was a partition, 7% 7% of the total land area of Palestine was actually owned by Jews. 7%. 93% records owned by native indigenous Palestinians. The claim, the fabricated claim, in my view, the mythical claim that the Bible gave us this land, or whoever, voice from heaven said, you go and take this land, as if this land belonged to nobody and no one was lived there, that is a myth I don't even contemplate thinking about. Now, if you start with that assumption, that's actually your problem, not mine. But so actually the land was not thought about from this point of view. That's one of those myths or lies that were created. Facts are basic and simple. The rest of the land, other than the 7%, the rest of the land has been taken, stolen by force, by all kinds of means, but primarily by military force. And then by a legal system that supported that military force to expropriate it. For the exclusive benefit of Jewish colonists. It's very clear. If you look at the series of laws that have been promulgated in Israel since 48, all do that. So this land, fighting over the land as if we're starting from equal position, and everybody is claiming the same thing, and somehow there is confusion. No one knows what the real thing is about, and that is not true. Is one of the propaganda myths that were created. I'm sorry if I was harsh, but I mean this is the whole question of land. There are many hands. Did you ask me this question, right? Or no?
Yeah, but I have like
two others. Then probably we should give, because this is not a press conference, right? Can I? Probably, yes.
In your vision for the future, you said that Palestinians should reserve the right to return to what is historic Palestine, which you said earlier in the presentation is about 93% of the land mass. So in that same vision, where do you see Israelis who currently occupy historic Palestine going in that vision? Where do you see them going as a result of Palestinians choosing to return to the land if they do so?
No, I'm seen as a joint country that they have to struggle together. The point which has to be emphasized, that I'm talking about in this vision, that we're talking about a country where there is no occupation, meaning where there is no majority is not controlling the minority. I'm talking about a country where existing Zionist systems of colonialism have to be dismantled, otherwise there is no solution. Meaning the legal systems that stole this land have to be abrogated, that's what I mean by dismantled. In other words, now, if somebody then says, in this kind of society, in this kind of country, I cannot live, that's fine, they can leave. But to be able to live there, you have to be able to accept this. In other words, you can't have the cake and eat it too. You can't stay there and say, well, I'm in control, and yet I want to live with the Palestinians as a subverted group or controlled group. Palestinians will not accept this. I, as a Palestinian, will not accept this. I'm sure the future generations will not accept it. Shall we take from the right, even though I tend to move to the left? There was, yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how has the election of Hamas, I guess, hampered any sort of solution for Palestinian people in terms of Israeli-Palestinian peace?
I don't think the election of Hamas hampered any resolution for Israel-Palestinian peace, because I don't think there was any resolution of that nature being on the table. But I see the election of Hamas showed the true nature of the control of the Palestinians and what is being imposed on them, which means the election of Hamas revealed clearly that actually the decision of the Palestinians to elect their representatives to the Legislative Council is not valid, is not accepted, unless they decide to vote for and elect the people we tell them to vote for and elect. We, meaning in this case, Israel and the US primarily, and those that follow. Yes, we stay on the left. Go ahead.
What effect do you think, in the West or in the United States, what effect do you think the media has portraying the conflict? I guess from a personal point of view, every day I hear about Hamas attacks or rockets being launched across the border, but very rarely do you hear about the plight of Palestinians. Do you think there's...
I think the mainstream media is very, it affects the concept of what's going on. It affects it in the sense that it distorts it. It lies about it. It doesn't tell the truth about it, because the mainstream media reflects the power in those countries. They reflect the official position of those countries. That's why in some of my classes today I mentioned, I think it is very important for us, if we really want to learn, it's very important for us to start looking, in order to give reference to ourselves, to start looking at alternative media sources, and there are hundreds of them, plenty of very critical alternative media sources, even sources that are published weekly or monthly on the internet. And that's where this flow of richness of positions and ideas and analysis and criticism is taking place, I think. And that is, to some degree, is starting to make a dent in this perception. But if we let it all, if we get our sources from CNN, Fox News, New York Times, Washington Post, and that's it, I think we have a problem. I think we have a problem in the sense of, I don't think we will know about the situation. Yes, we'll come back to the right. One or two more questions. It's all right, you can say out loud. One or two more questions. Please.
Sorry, I couldn't stop myself, but going back to the question where somebody asked if this is a religious issue, who owns the land. One point I want to make clear is that this issue is just beyond the political or the religious issue. People of certain class, certain race are being treated in a very different way. They're not giving proper access to water. The roads that are being built for them is different from what the Israelis is. And what is happening there is separation of people. So this issue goes beyond the political or beyond the religious issue. It goes to the core of the human rights issue. So we have to look at it in a way where when a class of people are being treated differently, then you cannot just base it on the basis of religion or basis of their nationality. You have to go beyond it, beyond the religion. This is a core human rights issue. And
Okay, yes, I agree. We'll take one more question since, let me just take people who did not ask. Yes, please.
When you started making your argument, first I thought, this is completely unreasonable. How can we even think of dismantling this Israeli state?
I didn't say dismantling Israeli state.
But to the extent that it would have to be transformed.
Yes.
And I thought, this is just, I mean, this is a country with 100 nuclear warheads, where is Professor Nakhleh going? But after I listened to you and I thought about it more, I think the position you've taken is a correct one. Because I hope you will be able to appeal to the right-thinking Jews all around the world to rethink about the injustice. And just if I may ask you, how would you approach that? For me, the issues are really one of justice and human rights. But how would we approach open-minded Jews to join in this struggle?
Let's be very, very specific. I don't use the term open-minded or closed-minded. In this case, I have to appeal to Jews who are willing to be critical of Zionism, willing to dissociate themselves from the Zionist ideology, and willing to look at me as an equal human being. In that sense, I would be willing to, as many are doing now, to do advocacy and awareness raising activities on these issues. And I think it's being done. And it's not because there are headways being made, and it's not as far-fetched as one would think. Thank you very much. Since I'm